Hello and welcome to the Phoenix 5-0 Info Show. I'm your host, Lieutenant Vince Lewis with the Phoenix Police Department Public Affairs Bureau, coming to you once again from beautiful downtown Phoenix. We are in police headquarters as we speak, and I got a special guest I want to introduce to you, somebody I've known for quite a while, Sergeant Kane Kimble. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Vince.
Kane, I brought you on because you and I share a passion over this particular topic. This is a timely topic, and it's very serious, and it affects our kids. It affects the students in the community. It affects the parents in the community, the schools in the community. We're going to talk about school threats, and I know it's kind of a ubiquitous topic now. Everybody's got an opinion on it, and everybody has theories and things, but we brought you on as a subject matter expert because you are the sergeant of the squad that investigates school threats. But you do so much more, right?
Right, we do.
Well, tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm one of 4 sergeants assigned to the Violent Crimes Bureau's Assaults Unit, and we handle 40 different types of criminal investigations. My specific specialty is school crimes and bias investigations. Mm-hmm. So we take everything from aggravated assaults to disorderly conducts and everything in between.
Yeah, that's a lot to handle.
Yes.
But so you and I, you've been in contact with our office and our PIO sergeants quite frequently in the recent weeks because we've seen, I guess, can we describe this as an uptick? Because I know school just started and we pay particular attention to school threats at the beginning of the school year. It's part of our back to school campaign when we message out safety messaging and things. But can we legitimately say that there's been an increase, or are we just seeing an increase in reporting?
Oh, this is absolutely an increase. It's an unprecedented increase. And while we're seeing this locally, it has increased on a national level as well.
Okay, so what are we talking about when we say there's been an increase in school threats? Tell me what you mean.
So if you look, we track data on school threats across years. And as school comes back in, we always see an uptick in this a little bit because obviously the month before there was no school threats. Right. So September, traditionally, there is an increase in these type of calls for service. In September of last year, we had something around the neighborhood of 35 to 40 school threats. This month alone, and we're not even at the end of September, we've had 74.
And these are individual school threats. They're not the same thing, kind of redone or dug up, or is that an element?
And that becomes a problem too, because it's hard to vet out which are new threats and which are reposts of threats that have been recirculated and re-reported to law enforcement for new investigation.
Yeah, some of the things that I learned during my time in Homeland when we were looking at threats alone was that sometimes somebody somewhere in one city will kind of Google an image of a gun, attach some generic school name to it, and then fire it off to see what kind of a reaction it gets. And then it ripples out across the United States because social media is everywhere and everybody's connected. And everybody has like a Central High School or a George Washington High School or some type of school that has just a kind of a generic name. That thing proliferates out to the borders and then kind of weeks, months later, ripples back as a new or a perceived new threat.
Absolutely.
Is that still a thing?
Yes, so there was one particular day last year where there was a school threat that started in Florida, and it was received nationally. And there was shutdowns at schools all over the nation on this school threat that started in Florida. Now, based upon the content of the messaging and the threats, you could kind of perceive that it wasn't geared towards us locally because there were schools that we didn't have, and there were businesses that were mentioned in the threat that are not present here in Arizona. But still, the effect and the impact on students and parents and administrators in schools is that they want to take these things seriously and they want the kids to be safe.
Yeah, and the impact could be anything from pulling a kid out of class and having a stern conversation to full lockdown and evacuation of a educational facility.
Absolutely.
Which is disruptive not only to the school and the kids, but it could take days, add days to your school year and all kinds of things. So what's an approach to this? How do we begin to kind of cut this off?
So it's tough. And I think that from law enforcement, we can only do so much. I think that much of these problems are at a societal level as well. But I think it's important for kids to understand that this is not a joke. When we talk to these kids and, when we find them and interview them as to what was the motivation behind it, most often it is because they thought it'd be funny, or they didn't necessarily think it was that big of a deal. Other motivations they've said were, I had testing the next day and I didn't want to take that test, or I made the threat on Thursday because I wanted to have the long 3-day weekend. So these are obviously frivolous reasons. Not that there's ever an appropriate reason to make this type of threat, but those are the type of reasons that we're seeing most commonly from the people who make the threats.
And these are kids. These are students. Ages you were talking about with the arrests. What's the age range of some of these arrests?
So recently, over the last 2 weeks, over the valley, the Greater Valley itself, there's been 12 arrests made, over 12. And the ages have ranged from 12 to 15. So we're talking 12-year-olds to 15-year-olds who are now being charged with felony terroristic threats because of something they perceived would be funny or as a joke. And we've had over 12 of them. 6 of them were arrested as part of a joint investigation with Mesa and Apache Junction. Here in Phoenix, we arrested a kid last week for 12 separate counts of terroristic threats. That particular one caused over 7,000 students to be absent from various local schools. So obviously that's a big deal.
Yeah. Is that it? Is it always just jokes, or what are some of the reasons? What are some of the other reasons?
So we've had kids who tell us that they were dared as part of a peer group. They thought it'd be funny. There was one particular student at the school they didn't like, but they didn't want to necessarily target that one particular student because they thought it would show that it was them that did it. So they target the entire school. I mean, whatever the reason is, there's no good reason for these types of things. There's no good reason for bringing this type of fear into an environment where kids should not be afraid to go.
Yeah, I've had these deep conversations, these honest conversations with my kids who, well, every time this pops up and we have that discussion at the dinner table, they do bring up a genuine, awareness, if not a fear of these types of things possibly occurring at the schools. You and I probably remember, some of the drills where I don't know if we were really ducking under desks, maybe in the elementary age, but we hear stories from our parents about how they would do that. They would, we definitely had fire drills.
Duck and cover.
Yeah, we had those types of things. And is this now the modern pulling the fire drill to get out of class? Is this the new calling in a bomb threat to evacuate the school?
It seems to be. Like when we were growing up, there wasn't the access of mass communication as there is now. And so it just seems to be, they have that technology at their fingertips all the time. And with sometimes very little limitations or guardrails in terms of how they can use it. So it seems to be the easier way of doing those type of things that you mentioned, pulling the fire alarm to get out of school, or calling in the bomb threat on the day of to your opponent's school's big game. It unfortunately it has manifested to where thousands of people are affected.
Yeah. So before I ask you if you have any more data or data points to share with us, or any other information you want out there, it seems to me like this is a conversation that has to start at home with the parents, get our kids prepped to go to school, and then give them some tools to use when they get to school if they were to encounter something similar. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. That's vital. These conversations need to be happening in the home. The foundation for any solid citizen starts at home. And police can only do so much. We only have so much access to kids and to people in general. So those conversations need to happen at home.
But you're doing a lot as police. Every one of these is investigated, right?
Yeah.
And let's get into the technical part of it. What I've learned is that every time somebody reposts it, as opposed to reporting it, that adds another complicated layer to what could be a shorter investigation.
Yes. So what happens quite often is, and especially in the ones that are kind of larger scale, is that somebody will take a snapshot of this post, and then they'll add a comment over the top of it, and then that spreads more fear to maybe different schools than the threat was originally posted for. And so we're working with the school districts on strongly advocating this report, don't repost policy. Because if they repost, it just adds additional fear and additional levels that law enforcement needs to scrutinize to get through to find the ultimate person who posted it in the first place.
So we want people to know that when they do report it to the proper authorities, at least when they report it to Phoenix Police, when they report it to your unit, we do investigate it. We investigate
absolutely.
Every one of them, and you guys work to identify the face behind the IP address.
Yes, we do everything we can. We do all of our due diligence to try and find the people who are responsible for this, because ultimately, we take every threat as credible until we can rule that it is not. Yeah. And so, obviously, you and I both have kids who go to school. I know the listeners to this podcast have kids that go to school. We believe very strongly that when you take your kid to school, this kid shouldn't feel scared that they're not going to make it home, and parents shouldn't feel scared their kid's not going to make it home. So you want to make it as safe of an environment for them as possible. And so that's the attitude we have when we get these.
So if knowledge is power and preparation takes over when uncertainty and fear proliferate, what do we tell our kids? How do we arm our kids? How do we prepare our kids? What do we tell them to do when this pops up on their phone?
So ultimately, one of the primary things that kids need to know is that this isn't a joke. This isn't an appropriate outlet for peer pressure or any of those types of motivations that might drive the posting of these types of things. It's not funny. There are real world ramifications. As I just said, we've had over 12 kids from ages 12 to 15 in the last 2 weeks booked into JCC for multiple felony offenses. They're going to face repercussions from their school up to possibly including expulsion. And that for the parents of the children, there's recently in state legislature that the parents can be held liable for any of the criminal investigations, civilly liable for up to $10,000. So if the criminal penalties aren't enough, the civil penalties are not insubstantial. A $10,000 check because your kid thought it'd be funny to play a joke is not something to sneeze at.
And that's Arizona Revised Statute.
Yes.
Which one?
It is Arizona Revised Statutes 13-2308.02.
Okay, perfect. So let's see if we can boil this down into 3 bullet points, like we talked about before we started recording. What's the message we want to make sure that our students, teachers, and schools and parents get out of this conversation? What do we want them to know? What is Phoenix Police message on school threats?
So the first thing is to the kids who are feeling that they should do this. This is not a joke. This is serious. It doesn't matter if your friends tell you it's going to be funny. It is not a joke, and there are real world repercussions, not only to your school, but to your classmates. One of the things that I see quite a bit is peer students are getting tired of this too. And so there is peer pressure on students who post these things, to not do this anymore. To the parents is know what your kids are doing, and we've said this for years, there's always been internet safety education, we've always been afraid of talking to the stranger on the internet, and that still holds true. But you've got to be aware of what your kids are putting out on the internet. And if your kids are posting these type of threats, you can be held responsible for it as well. And 3, and I think this is important as well, if you come across a social media post as a parent, as a student, report that to somebody you trust. If you're a student, report it to your parent, report it to your teacher, report it to law enforcement. That will help us try and get to the investigation and determine whether or not there's credibility to these threats and take appropriate action.
Perfect. So report, don't repost. Have that conversation at home with your students, and stay in touch and follow us on social media, and you'll hear more stories about the arrests that we're making. We're going to find them. We're going to arrest them.
Yep.
This has to stop.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank Sergeant Kane Kimble for coming on the show. I'd like to thank the crew for producing, you, the audience, for attending. And I'd like to remind everybody out there that you too can help solve crime in your community by sending tips to Silent Witness, potentially earn a cash reward. Call 480-WITNESS or visit silentwitness.org. Go to phxpd.com. Join phxpd.com. We're hiring, and find out about all the opportunities where you can help your police department here in Phoenix. And remember, we're all in this together.